Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Tonight I want to do a little review on a knife that means a lot to me. I actually thought this knife was lost and caused me to go into somewhat of a panic, but we'll get into that here in a minute. The knife that I'm talking about tonight is the Case 2-blade large hunter. This knife actually was gifted to my father in 1979 by my cousin. And every camping trip we went on as a family, every hunting trip me and Dad went on, every Boy Scout camping trip, every Girl Scout camping trip that he accompanied my mother and my sister on, he always had this knife with him. To Dad, this was his outdoor knife. And that was the only time he ever carried this knife, was when we were doing something outdoors like that. He didn't carry this every day. He felt that it was too big. My father collected knives. He didn't believe in fixed blade. He thought fixed blade knives were dangerous. So everything he collected was pocket knives. When he passed away in 2012, and I started going through his knife collection looking for this knife, I stopped counting at 150 pocket knives that he had. That being said, out of all of his many pocket knives, he only had about a half a dozen that he actually used. The rest of them were, for lack of a better way of putting it, were for nothing more than to look at. This knife here in particular, like I said, it's the Case 2-blade hunter. For those who don't know much about, or do know much about the stamping, the stamp on this knife, get it up where you can see it, there we go. This Case stamp was only used from 1970 to 1979. The dot at the bottom indicates the year of manufacture. In 1970, this knife had 10 dots across the bottom. And every year after 1970, they took away a dot. So that indicates that this knife was made in 1979. Dad used this knife a lot when we were out in the field. It has a high carbon content. If you look at the blade, you can see it's got some sharpening marks, some wear and tear on it. It's got some decent discoloration to it due to the carbon content of the blade. And that blade there is particularly the only blade he used on a regular basis. If you look at this one, you can still see it's got the mirror finish on it all the way out to the end. There's a little rust out here in the end. You can see a few little sharpening marks on it, but that's it. This blade here, about the only thing he used it for was cleaning game, and that was it. The general use of this knife come on that blade. The overall length of this knife closed is 5 1/4 inches. The blades, both of them, are 4 inches. And as you can see looking at it there, both blades are the exact same length. There's no difference in the length of them. They still make a version of this knife today. They also have recently started making a smaller version of this. Best I can tell from my research, the lanyard hole in this disappeared somewhere in the mid-80s. And they no longer include that. It's got some sort of wood handle on it. I'm not sure what kind it is or anything like that. But like I said, this knife accompanied him on any outing that we went on, other than just trips to town and so forth. This is the original sheath that come with it. As you can tell, it's got a lot of wear and tear on it. All the chrome is wore off of the snap and so forth. It's rather thin, as you can see. But I guess that was the design of these back then. The modern sheath blades that you get now are a whole lot deeper than that, top to bottom. But this knife caused me to go into a great panic when my father passed away in 2012. Out of all of his knives, this was the only one I was interested in finding. And it was because of the sentimental value of it, of him always having it with him when we went camping or hunting or was out with Boy Scouts or whatever. I went through all of my dad's knives and couldn't find it. My sister and I spent about 2 weeks going through things just trying to find this knife. Eventually, after about 2 weeks, I found it in probably one of the strangest places I could say. It was inside of a sock in his sock drawer. Why he had it there, I have no idea. Don't know why he would have put it inside of a sock in his sock drawer when he had cases upon cases of felt and velvet lined knife cases that he could have put this in, but that's where he had it. He only had about a half a dozen knives that he used on a regular basis. The rest of them he just put up for show. But this knife was the knife my dad used to teach me a lot of what I know. I believe in my Figure 4 deadfall video, I talked about him showing us how to do that on a Boy Scout camping trip. And this was actually the knife that he used. You've seen this knife in a couple of videos, and you'll see it in more. But I will not be doing a lot of heavy use with it. It'll be mostly whittling and kind of milder stuff with it. But like I said, this knife caused me to have a great panic when I couldn't find it with all of his other knives. I'm tickled to death that I was able to find it just because of the sentimental value of it. Smoky Mountain Knife Works still shows this knife in their inventory. Their base model's somewhere around $60. I do believe they show one that is 6.5 stag that is right around $100. But like I said, they quit using the lanyard hole somewhere in the mid-80s, the best I can find. Dad carried this one. It had a leather thong in the lanyard hole for the longest time, and it has since dry rotted and broke and come out. Needless to say, there is not enough money to buy this knife from me. My father was a great influence. He was born in 1935 and grew up during the latter part of the Great Depression through World War II. He was the youngest of 9 kids. He was the youngest boy. He had, oh Lord, he had 5 older brothers. He would have made the 6th brother. He had 1 sister. He had 2 twins that were born that didn't make it past a year old. And growing up in the area of Kentucky, they grew a lot of their own vegetables and so forth. They had a farm. They raised a pretty good garden. They raised a couple of cows here and there, a couple of pigs here and there, mainly for food and to trade. They did a lot of trading for beef and stuff that they didn't have throughout the year. They also supplemented a lot of their meat intake with wild game. Quail, squirrel, rabbit, fish, that kind of stuff, groundhog. And they would either kill those with .22 rifles, slingshots, trap, whatever. Dad actually told me that he remembers being in his early teens when Kentucky Fish and Wildlife reintroduced deer into Kentucky. He said they actually come to the community that he grew up in and come in with a gooseneck trailer full of deer and release them. He said the whole community actually turned out to see the state release these deer because none of them had ever seen a deer before. And I always thought that was just interesting to hear that story. I can't imagine being in an area and never seeing a deer with the way they are in Kentucky now. But I appreciate y'all watching. Here, I want to show you a picture of my father. If I can get it here. This is a picture of my dad and me when I was maybe about 3 years old. Dad teaching me bad habits. Luckily, that was a habit I never picked up. But I owe everything I am to him and my mother. I've got a picture here of her too. I lost Dad in 2012 to mouth cancer. Dad never really smoked other than a pipe, but he chewed a lot. And I think him having dentures and him chewing is what led to his mouth cancer. This is him and my mother in high school. He married my mom right after she graduated high school. And they were married for almost 51 years. Mom, sorry, this is hard. Mom actually passed away in 2010, 11 days before her, what would have been her 69th birthday. And if she had made it till February the 14th of that year, they would have been married 51 years. So I lost her in January of 2010 and then lost my dad in November of 2012. Both of them I lost to cancer. So I appreciate y'all watching. Hope you found this interesting. Like, share, subscribe, and I'll get another video up for you soon. Y'all have a good night.